The glass walls of the penthouse gleamed with the first bite of morning sun, reflecting the skyline of Chicago like a crown of steel and glass. Inside, the silence was broken by the soft cooing of a baby, tiny fingers grabbing the air, eyes wide with curiosity. But what shattered Alexander Kane's controlled world wasn't the sound of his daughter's laughter. It was the single word that slipped from her lips, clear and innocent, "Dada." The problem was, she wasn't looking at him. Standing just beyond the playpen was Raphael Cruz, the gardener Alexander had hired 3 years ago to tame the wild rooftop garden. Dirt still stained Raphael's calloused hands, and the faint smell of cut lavender lingered around him. When the baby reached for him, repeating the word again, Alexander's chest constricted. His empire, built on contracts, numbers, and ruthless negotiations, suddenly felt as fragile as glass. He had worked too many late nights, taken too many flights, missed too many firsts, and now his daughter's first word was not meant for him. Raphael froze, guilt flickering across his features, as though he'd been caught stealing something sacred. "Mr. Kane, she doesn't mean—" But Alexander cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Get out!" The silence that followed was heavier than steel. The baby whimpered, confused at the sudden distance, little arms still stretched toward the gardener. For the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless, outmatched not by a rival billionaire, but by the quiet bond forming between his daughter and the man who trimmed hedges for a living. In that moment, he knew this wasn't just about a word. It was about losing the one thing money couldn't buy. And somewhere deep down, a darker question began to coil in his mind. What if the gardener wasn't just a gardener? He turned toward the playpen, his jaw tight. He needed answers. But first, he needed to know the truth about Raphael Cruz. Alexander Kane wasn't a man who waited for answers. His entire empire, hotels stretching from Dubai to Miami, tech startups, and the most exclusive private equity firm in Chicago, had been built on ripping away masks and exposing weaknesses before anyone else could. Yet, as he stood at the edge of the rooftop garden that morning, he realized his opponent was unlike any he had faced. Raphael Cruz wasn't a boardroom rival. He was the man who had just stolen his daughter's first word. Raphael was still working among the roses when Alexander approached. The gardener's hands moved with precision, trimming back overgrowth, every snip deliberate, every gesture careful. There was a quiet dignity about him, a patience that made Alexander bristle. "Tell me," Alexander said, his voice low but sharp, "why does my daughter call you father?" Raphael set down his shears, his posture straightening, though his eyes didn't rise immediately. He wiped his hands on his apron before finally meeting Alexander's gaze. Children notice things adults ignore. Maybe she feels something missing. The words cut deeper than Alexander expected. He clenched his jaw. "Don't play games with me. I want the truth." For a moment, Raphael's expression softened, but then he shook his head. "The truth isn't mine to tell, Mr. Kane." That answer wasn't enough. It was infuriating, but it was also suspicious. Alexander had long suspected that his late wife, Elena, carried secrets he never unraveled. She had passed away shortly after giving birth, leaving him with nothing but questions and a child who had never once looked at him with the same warmth she now gave a stranger. Could Raphael somehow be part of Elena's hidden life? That night, as his daughter slept in the nursery, Alexander opened a locked drawer in his study. Inside was Elena's old journal, leather-worn and smelling faintly of her perfume. He had never dared to read it until now. Flipping through the fragile pages, he found passages filled with sketches of flowers, notes about the garden on the rooftop, and small, tender lines about someone who listened when no one else did. A gardener. Alexander's heart raced. Was Raphael just a confidant to his wife, or something more? The baby stirred in her crib, mumbling in half words. And again, through the baby monitor, Alexander heard it, "Dada." Soft, certain, reaching out not for him, but for Raphael. The pen slipped from his hand. His wife's journal lay open, whispering questions he wasn't ready to face, because the answer might mean his daughter didn't truly belong to him at all. He closed the journal with a snap, only to hear footsteps outside his study door. And then, a knock. The knock was soft, hesitant, too delicate to belong to a housekeeper, too purposeful to be a mistake. Alexander froze. Elena's journal still clutched in his hand. His instinct screamed to lock the drawer, to bury the words back where they belonged. But instead, he straightened and called out, "Enter!" The door creaked open, and there stood Raphael, his apron gone, his dark shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms marked by years of work. He looked uneasy, almost guilty, as if he'd been standing outside long enough to know exactly what Alexander had been reading. "I shouldn't be here," Raphael began, his voice steady but low, "but I think it's time you and I talked." Alexander's pulse ticked in his throat. He leaned back against his desk, masking tension with cold authority. "You've been in my house for 3 years, Raphael. 3 years, and I know nothing about you. Tell me, why now?" Raphael's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to the journal in Alexander's hand before returning to his eyes. "Because she deserves more than silence. Elena, she trusted me with something before she died." The name cut through the room like broken glass. Alexander's grip on the journal whitened his knuckles. "And what exactly did my wife trust you with?" Raphael took a breath, as though weighing the weight of each word. Her truth. But before he could say more, a thin cry echoed through the baby monitor. The baby had woken again, restless. Alexander instinctively reached for the monitor, but Raphael was already at the door, halfway down the hall, before Alexander could stop him. The scene in the nursery twisted something deep in Alexander's chest. His daughter reached toward Raphael with unmistakable joy, tiny hands flapping, eyes bright. When Raphael lifted her into his arms, she calmed instantly, laying her head against his shoulder like she had done it 100 times before. "See?" Raphael whispered softly, unaware Alexander stood in the doorway. "You're safe. I promised your mama I'd protect you." The words burned. They weren't meant for Alexander, yet they stabbed deeper than any betrayal he had endured in the boardroom. He stepped forward, his voice ice. "Enough. Put her down." Raphael hesitated, then gently lowered the baby back into her crib, where she whimpered, unwilling to let him go. When Raphael turned, his eyes met Alexander's, steady, unflinching. "You can hate me, Mr. Kane," Raphael said, "but don't punish her for it. She doesn't know lies, she only knows where she feels safe." For the first time, Alexander faltered. His daughter's tiny fingers clutched at the air, still reaching for the man who wasn't her father, or was he? The question thundered louder with every beat of his heart, and Raphael's next words didn't silence it. They fueled it. "Elena wanted you to know, but she didn't have the chance." The room seemed to shrink. Alexander's breath grew shallow, because that sentence didn't just suggest a secret, it promised a revelation that could shatter everything. The words hung in the nursery air like smoke that refused to clear. "Elena wanted you to know." Alexander's fists curled at his sides, every instinct battling between fury and the desperate need to demand the rest. But Raphael didn't move, didn't elaborate. His silence was intentional, like a man who had already decided to wait until the last possible second to play his card. Alexander's voice came out as a growl. "What did she want me to know?" Raphael glanced at the crib, where the baby was drifting back into soft whimpers of sleep, her small chest rising and falling. His eyes softened before he met Alexander's again. "Not here, not now. She deserves peace." It infuriated Alexander, but there was something undeniable about the way Raphael's tone carried weight, not of arrogance, but of protection. He knew something Alexander didn't, and that knowledge gave him power. Alexander hated that. The next morning, Alexander arrived at his office in the heart of the loop, his mind in turmoil. He tried burying himself in numbers, contracts, the safe chaos of empire building, but his concentration fractured every time he thought of Elena's journal lying on his desk at home. Every time he saw Raphael's steady eyes. Every time he remembered the way his daughter reached for the gardener, not him. It was in that moment, staring out over the skyline, that he realized his greatest fear. Power meant nothing if he couldn't hold on to his family. That afternoon he returned home early, an uncharacteristic move that startled even the household staff. When he stepped onto the rooftop, the late summer air was thick with the scent of roses and basil. Raphael was there, kneeling in the soil, tending to roots with a gentleness that seemed misplaced in Alexander's brutal world. "You're not just a gardener," Alexander said, his voice slicing the silence. Raphael didn't look up. "And you're not just a father." Alexander stiffened. "You'd better explain that." Raphael finally rose, dusting soil from his hands. "Elena knew you loved her, but she also knew your love came with walls she couldn't always climb over. She wanted you to see what family meant outside of control." His eyes narrowed, not unkindly. "She asked me to make sure your daughter grew up knowing love she could touch." It was almost unbearable. The implication, the intimacy Elena had entrusted to another man. Alexander's heart slammed against his ribs. "You're saying what? That she chose you over me?" Raphael shook his head slowly. "Not over you, beside you." The words were maddeningly cryptic. Alexander turned away, pacing the rooftop, struggling to rein in the storm inside. He wanted facts, not riddles. Proof, not philosophy. As he walked, his gaze snagged on something half buried near the base of the rose trellis. A flash of leather. He crouched, pulling it free. It was small, weather-worn. Elena's locket, one he hadn't seen since the funeral, but when he opened it, his chest tightened. Inside wasn't his picture. It was Raphael's. The sound of his own breath roared in his ears. He turned to confront Raphael, only to find the man gone. The rooftop stretched out in silence, the garden swaying in the late summer wind, but Raphael was nowhere. The locket trembled in Alexander's hand, its weight far heavier than metal should allow. His chest burned with a dozen questions. Why was Raphael's picture inside Elena's keepsake? Why had she hidden it? And why had Raphael vanished now, at the exact moment the truth demanded answers? Alexander stormed down through the penthouse, past startled staff. "Find him!" he barked at his head of security. "I don't care if he's in the city or halfway across the world. Bring me Raphael Cruz." Hours bled into night. The baby cried restlessly, inconsolable, reaching toward the empty corners of rooms where Raphael was not. Alexander tried everything, cradling her awkwardly, humming tunes he barely remembered from his own childhood. But nothing soothed her. Only exhaustion dragged her to sleep, her cheeks damp, her tiny hands still clutching at air. For the first time, Alexander felt the full weight of fatherhood without the shield of wealth. It wasn't about private jets or trust funds. It was about being there. And he wasn't sure he knew how. By midnight, his security team returned empty-handed. No trace of Raphael, no digital footprints, no calls, no credit card swipes. The man had vanished like smoke. Frustration boiled into obsession. Alexander returned to the journal, searching for anything that could explain the locket. Between the pages he'd skimmed earlier, he noticed something he hadn't before. Tiny pressed petals, lavender and rosemary, tucked between words about truth and trust. In one entry, Elena had written, "If he refuses to listen, the garden will tell him." Alexander read it 3 times, each more puzzling than the last. The garden. His wife had hidden something there, something Raphael knew. The next morning, just before dawn, Alexander crept into the rooftop garden alone. He searched beneath rose bushes, around the basil beds, even along the stone planters. Finally, behind the trellis where he had found the locket, his hand brushed something solid, buried in soil. A wooden box, weather-worn, sealed shut. With trembling hands, he pried it open. Inside lay a stack of letters tied with ribbon, all addressed in Elena's looping script, some to Alexander, some to Raphael. His pulse hammered. He untied the ribbon, skimming the first page. "My love," it began, not directed at him. The breath punched out of his lungs. His wife had written words of devotion, but not for him. And yet, in the next letter, addressed to Alexander, she wrote with equal tenderness. Apologies for her secrets, pleas for understanding, and a line that chilled him. "When the day comes, you'll see why Raphael and I had to protect her this way." Alexander staggered back, the letters spilling across the soil. Had he been living a lie? Was his marriage nothing but a facade? Or had Elena loved them both, in different ways? The garden seemed to close in around him, leaves whispering like accusations. He clutched one letter in his fist, chest aching, as a terrifying realization set in. The truth wasn't just about who his daughter called Dad. It was about what Elena had hidden from him, about the dangerous choice she made before she died. And if Raphael had disappeared now, it meant someone else might be hunting for that same truth. If you're with us so far, tap like "What comes next changes everything." The sound of footsteps snapped Alexander's head up. He wasn't alone on the rooftop, but the figure stepping from the shadows wasn't Raphael. The shadow stretched long across the rooftop, cutting through the scattered letters like a blade. Alexander's pulse spiked as the figure emerged into the dim pre-dawn light. It was not Raphael. It was a woman, early 40s, sharp-featured, dressed in understated black. Her hair was pinned back in a severe knot, and her eyes, cold as obsidian, scanned the garden with surgical precision. She moved not like a guest, but like someone who owned the space. "Mr. Kane," she said smoothly, her voice low, cultured. "You've finally found them." Alexander instinctively shielded the letters with his arm. "Who are you?" She smiled faintly, as though amused by the question. "Someone who knew Elena far better than you ever did." His stomach lurched. "You're lying." Her smile sharpened. "Am I? Tell me, did she ever mention the name Isabella Marquez?" The name slammed into him like a strike. He had seen it before, in Elena's journal, scrawled in the margins near entries about truth and trust. But he'd assumed it was a client or a passing friend, not this. "I was her sister," Isabella said softly, tilting her head. "Her real family, the one she never told you about." The rooftop tilted beneath Alexander's feet. Elena had never mentioned a sister, never. Yet here stood a woman who looked uncannily like her, the same eyes, the same set of her jaw, though hardened by something far darker. "And Raphael?" Alexander forced out. Isabella's expression flickered, then hardened. "He was part of it. We all were. Elena trusted him because he owed her his life. But you..." She stepped closer, her voice like a knife slipping between ribs. "You were never meant to know." Alexander's chest burned. He clutched one of Elena's letters, the ink blurring beneath his grip. "What are you after?" "Protection," Isabella said. "For the child. Because if you keep digging into secrets that weren't meant for you, you'll put her in danger. Elena's choices, they had consequences you don't understand." The words twisted into him like barbed wire. His empire, his billions, his relentless control. None of it could shield him from this revelation. Elena had hidden a sister, a man she trusted more than him, letters that split her love in two, and now a threat that loomed beyond his understanding. The baby cried in the distance, her small voice carrying through the halls. Isabella's gaze flicked toward the sound, her expression momentarily unguarded. There was something fierce in her eyes, protective, desperate. "She's the only thing that matters now," Isabella whispered. "If you love her, Alexander, walk away from this, burn the letters, forget Raphael, forget me." Alexander's heart thundered. Forget? After everything he had uncovered, after finding his wife's hidden truths tangled with this stranger? Impossible. But before he could respond, Isabella leaned close enough for him to smell the faint trace of roses on her skin, her words a razor against his ear. "Elena died for a reason, and if you don't stop, so will you." Then, like smoke, she was gone, slipping back into the shadows, leaving the garden silent but charged, the letters scattered like fallen leaves. Alexander stood frozen, the baby's cries echoing through the house. He clenched the letters in his fist, torn between burning them or reading until every secret was laid bare. And deep inside, a realization dawned. Elena's death hadn't been an accident. It had been a choice. Alexander descended from the rooftop with the weight of the letters pressing into his chest like contraband. Isabella's warning clung to him like smoke, her voice still cutting through the night air. Elena died for a reason. In the nursery, his daughter stirred in her crib, soft curls plastered to her forehead with sweat. She whimpered until Alexander's shadow crossed the room, then quieted, her tiny hand brushing the air. For a fleeting moment, he thought, maybe she knows I'm here. Maybe she knows I'm her father. But her hand turned, reaching toward the door, toward someone else. And then Alexander heard it, the faint creak of the penthouse entrance. His security team hadn't returned. He hadn't buzzed anyone in. He grabbed the baby monitor, tucking it under his arm, and moved silently toward the sound. Every instinct screamed of danger, sharpened by Isabella's warning. The figure that stepped into the dim light of the foyer made his heart seize. Raphael. But he wasn't the same man Alexander had seen trimming roses. His shirt was torn, dirt smeared across his jaw, his eyes wild as though he had run through the night. He carried nothing but his breath and urgency. "You're in danger," Raphael said, not bothering with pleasantries. "And so is she." His gaze flicked toward the nursery. Alexander's fury flared. "Danger from you, or from Elena's secret sister who just appeared out of the shadows to threaten me?" Raphael froze, his eyes darkening. "Isabella found you. She claims to be Elena's family, claims Elena trusted her more than me, claims Elena's death wasn't an accident." Alexander stepped forward, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. "So tell me the truth, Raphael. Why does my wife's locket carry your face? Why does my daughter call you father? And why the hell should I believe a single word from you?" Raphael's hands trembled at his sides, but his eyes, tired, defiant, held steady. "Because Elena asked me to stand where you couldn't. Because she knew there were enemies you didn't see. And because the night she died, she wasn't running from fate. She was running from them." Alexander's breath hitched. "Them?" Raphael stepped closer, urgency tightening his voice. "The people Elena was trying to protect your daughter from. Isabella is only the beginning. If they know you found the letters, if they know you're digging—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "We don't have time. You have to choose, Alexander, right now. Either keep pretending money can shield you, or fight with me to protect her." The words landed heavy, unrelenting. Alexander's entire life had been about control, about bending the world to his will. But now, staring at Raphael, the man his daughter trusted, the man his wife had secretly leaned on, he felt that control slipping through his fingers. He looked toward the nursery, where his daughter's small breaths rose and fell, the only sound anchoring him to the moment. This was no longer about pride, no longer about betrayal. It was about survival. Alexander exhaled, the decision crystallizing in the space between his heartbeat and his daughter's cry. "Fine," he said. "We fight together. But if you betray me—" Raphael cut him off, his voice breaking with sincerity. "I already swore to Elena. My loyalty isn't in question. Yours is." The words stung like truth. Before Alexander could respond, the penthouse windows shuddered violently, an explosion of glass tearing through the night. They weren't alone anymore. The blast of shattering glass thundered through the penthouse like a gunshot. Shards rained down across marble floors, the night air ripping into the room. Alexander shielded his face with his arm, adrenaline flooding his veins. He looked up. Dark silhouettes moved against the skyline, figures sliding through the broken window with precision, armed, disciplined, not burglars, professionals. Raphael pulled Alexander down behind the couch, his voice a harsh whisper. "They've found us. Stay low. Keep her safe." Alexander's mind raced. These weren't business rivals, weren't paparazzi. They were the they Raphael had warned about, the ones Elena had apparently spent her last days running from. For the first time, Alexander understood. This was bigger than him, bigger than his empire. He grabbed the baby monitor and sprinted for the nursery, heart slamming against his ribs. His daughter woke crying, startled by the explosion. He scooped her up, clutching her tiny body against his chest. She trembled, her breath ragged. But when her eyes locked on his, she quieted, just for a moment. And in that fragile silence, Alexander felt something break open inside him. Not fear, not anger, something purer. For the first time, she was reaching for him. Gunmetal shadows swept closer. A muffled shout echoed down the hall. Raphael appeared, blood streaking his temple, one sleeve torn. He shoved a small metal key into Alexander's free hand. "Elena made me keep this," Raphael panted. "A safe house. Everything you need to know is there. Proof, truth, the plan she left behind. Take her. Go. I'll hold them." Alexander's throat constricted. "You'll be killed." Raphael gave a grim smile. "I swore to protect her. That oath doesn't end with me walking away." For once, Alexander couldn't command, couldn't buy, couldn't control. All he could do was choose. And the choice was brutal: stay and fight beside Raphael, or run and ensure his daughter lived to see morning. Tears stung his eyes as he kissed his daughter's hair, her scent of lavender and innocence cutting through the chaos. He looked at Raphael, at the man who had become more of a father than he had been. "Don't die on me," Alexander said, voice breaking. Raphael gripped his shoulder hard. "Don't waste what she gave her life for." Then Alexander ran, through smoke, through glass, through fear, his daughter pressed to his chest, her tiny heartbeat pounding against his. Behind him, gunfire erupted, shouts colliding with Raphael's defiant roar. The city lights swallowed him as he fled into the night, clutching the key, the baby, and the shattering truth of his wife's double life. On a deserted street corner, under the cold glow of a street lamp, Alexander looked down at his daughter, her hand pressed against his heart, her eyes wide, trusting. And for the first time he whispered, not as a billionaire, not as a man betrayed, but as a father finally awakened, "You're safe. I won't fail you again." The baby cooed softly, her first word trembling on her lips. She looked at him, not at Raphael, not at a shadow, and said it. "Dad." Alexander's knees nearly buckled. In the ruins of his broken world, that single word gave him the strength to rise. The road ahead was uncertain, full of enemies and secrets left to uncover, but one truth remained unshakable. He was her father, and this time he would fight like one. What would you have done in their place? Tell us below. If this gave you hope today, share it with someone who needs it.